A mother lion went against every natural instinct she had. She trusted humans with her dying baby. At sunrise, a lioness stood quietly by a metal fence. Her body shook with tiredness. In her mouth, she held a dying cub. He could barely breathe. His future was uncertain. She had walked for miles across the desert to reach this place. She knew what she was about to do went against everything nature had taught her. If she let go, she might never see him again. If she didn't, he would surely die. This is the story of a mother who made an impossible choice. She waited 3 long weeks to find out if love had been enough. Dawn arrived in the high desert like it wasn't sure it should come at all. Thin, pale, cold light spread over red rock and dry bushes. The sun seemed unsure if it deserved to rise. The wind carried the dry smell of plants and dust. Somewhere beyond the rocky hills, a coyote called once. Then it went quiet. At the edge of Sandstone Ridge Wildlife Rescue, a fence cut a clean line through the land. Steel posts. Woven wire. A practical border between what humans could control and what they could only hope to help. And there, just outside the fence, stood a lioness. She wasn't the golden blur people imagined from TV shows. Up close, she was a monument of exhaustion. Her coat was dulled with dirt. Her shoulders looked sharp from weeks of hunger. Her whiskers were caked with dried sand. Her eyes were the color of old amber. But the shine in them had been worn down by something harsher than heat. In her jaws hung a cub. He was so small that his back legs dangled like loose ropes. His body was too still, too quiet. Every now and then, so faint it could have been mistaken for wind, his rib cage lifted and fell. A shallow, stubborn rise. A desperate, fragile insistence on being alive. Inside the compound, motion sensors had chimed at first light. A volunteer checked the monitor, gasped, and called into the staff trailer with a voice that didn't sound like their own. Dr. Evelyn Carter stepped out minutes later. She pulled on her boots without fully tying them. Her hair was twisted back. Jacket thrown over a worn field shirt. At 42, she had the kind of calm that wasn't natural but built layer by layer, case by case. She had spent years learning to read fear in animals that could outrun her and break her bones. When she saw the lioness, Evelyn stopped so suddenly her breath caught. Because she recognized her. Not by face the way people recognized each other. By posture. By the jagged crescent scar on the left shoulder where fur never grew back right. By the particular way the lioness held herself. Chin slightly lifted, as if pride was the one thing she could still keep. Era. Evelyn hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. Not since the wildfire season. Not since a night when smoke had turned the world gray and a tranquilizer dart had been a last resort. Not since Era had woken in a temporary holding pen and stared at her like she was choosing whether to forgive the idea of humans at all. Era stared now, unblinking. She didn't retreat. A young worker beside Evelyn whispered, "Should we call fish and game?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't take her eyes off the lioness. Because Era's stance wasn't a hunting stance. It wasn't a threat. She wasn't pacing or testing the fence for weakness. She wasn't stalking shadows. She was waiting. As if she'd walked through miles of sun and pain to arrive at one final door. And she needed the world to open it. Evelyn raised one hand. Not high. Not fast. Just enough for Era to see it. She took one step toward the fence. Then, another. The volunteers behind her fell silent, as if the whole rescue center had learned how to breathe quietly. The distance between predator and human shrank into something intimate and dangerous. Wire hummed faintly in the wind. Evelyn's hand reached the fence. Her fingers threaded slowly through the squares of metal. Palm angled up. Empty. She kept her body turned slightly sideways, the way she'd been taught. Less a challenge. More an offering. She spoke softly. Not because she believed Era understood English, but because tone was older than language. "Hey," she murmured. "It's okay. I'm here." Era didn't blink. For a moment, the only sound was the desert moving. Brush whispering. A distant hawk cry. The hush of early morning pressing down like a prayer. Then the cub convulsed. Just once. A weak tremor that ran through him and faded, leaving him even looser in Era's jaws. His tail twitched and went still. Evelyn felt her own stomach turn cold. She had seen death enough times to recognize its handwriting. This cub was slipping. Era's chest rose. Fell. Her nostrils flared as if she were tasting the air for one last answer. And in her eyes, those worn, amber eyes, something burned that did not belong to a wild animal. Not rage. Not fear. Desperation. The kind that came when you were out of options. When instinct had failed you. When the world had already taken too much and was still reaching for more. Evelyn's fingers trembled despite her training. She steadied them against the wire and kept her palm open. Era took one slow step forward. The fence separated them by less than 3 feet. Close enough that Evelyn could see the fine dust clinging to Era's whiskers. Close enough that she could smell the lioness. Sunday. Wild musk. And the metallic edge of exhaustion. Era lowered her head slightly. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought she might lunge. Thought this might be the moment every warning poster was made for. Thought she might be the foolish human who mistook pain for permission. But Era did not lunge. She opened her jaws with a careful slowness that looked almost like respect. And the cub, Noah, though Evelyn did not know his name yet, slid forward. Evelyn caught him. His body was warm in the wrong way. Feverish and damp. His gums were pale. Foam clung faintly to one corner of his mouth. His breathing came in shallow, uneven pulls, like the air itself was too heavy to lift. Evelyn cradled him close without pulling him away too fast. As if ripping him from his mother's sight would break whatever thread of trust had just formed. She looked up, meeting Era's gaze through the fence. "I've got him," she whispered. "I've got him." Era stared at the cub in Evelyn's arms as if trying to memorize the image. As if she needed to carry proof of it back into the desert. Then, without a sound, she turned. Not a retreat in panic. Not a scatter of fear. A deliberate pivot. Like a decision made and sealed. Her muscles tensed beneath dusty fur, and she began to move away from the fence. Into the thinning shadow of the morning. Evelyn's chest tightened. Instinct screamed at her to call out. To stop her. To ask the only questions that mattered. Where are the others? How long have you been running? Will you come back? But she didn't speak. Because Era's pace was not the pace of a lioness leaving a threat. It was the pace of a mother racing towards something she'd left behind. Evelyn watched the lioness disappear into the brush. swallowed by the desert as cleanly as if she'd never existed at all. Behind Evelyn, someone found their voice again. "Dr. Carter, what do we do?" Evelyn looked down at the cub in her arms. His eyes were half open, unfocused. A weak sound scraped out of him. More breath than cry. His small body shivered like a match trying not to go out. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Prep the medical tent," she said, turning toward the compound. Her voice was steady now, but something inside her had changed. Like a door had opened and would not close again. Warm fluids. Oxygen. Activated charcoal if we can get it mixed fast. She started walking, then broke into a run. And as she ran, a single thought beat in her mind like a second pulse. Sharp. Urgent. Unavoidable. Era didn't bring this cub here because she wanted to. She brought him here because she had to. And if she had to, that meant somewhere out there, beyond the fence, in the wide, merciless desert where the sun rose without mercy, she had left something precious behind. Evelyn pushed through the door of the medical tent. The cub's shallow breaths warmed her forearm. She whispered to no one and everyone at once. "Hold on, little one. Your mom is counting on us." Then she laid him on the table under the bright LED lamp. And the desert morning outside kept moving. Quiet. Indifferent. While inside, the fight for a single heartbeat began. While the medical tent filled with hurried footsteps and the sharp scent of medicine, the desert beyond the fence remained unchanged. Vast. Indifferent. Already forgetting the shape of the lioness who had crossed it before dawn. Hours earlier, that same desert had been Era's entire world. The sun had climbed fast that morning, burning away the thin mercy of night. It pressed its weight down on the land. The high desert stretched in every direction. Dry brush brittle as bone. Red earth cracked by drought. Distant hills shimmering in heat. This was not a place that allowed mistakes. It remembered weakness and punished it. Era moved low and steady through the land. Her paws knew every rise and dip of the ground. She had lived here long enough to read the land the way humans read maps. By scent. By shadow. By the way the wind shifted against her whiskers. Once, this territory had been generous. Now it was thinning, hollowing out, turning survival into a daily battle. Behind her, three small shapes struggled to keep pace. Luca barreled forward with the reckless confidence of a cub who had not yet learned fear properly. Maya stayed closer, lighter on her feet, eyes always flicking toward the horizon. And Noah lagged behind. His steps were uneven, his breath already shallow long before the day grew hot. Era slowed for him instinctively, adjusting her pace without thinking. Noah had always been the quiet one, the smallest, the one who pressed closer at night and tired faster when the ground turned steep. In better seasons, it would not have mattered. In this season, it mattered too much. Hunger had sharpened everything. The smell of prey was faint and rare now, carried in broken threads that vanished before Era could follow them far. Fires the previous summer had driven animals away. Human fences farther south had cut off old migration routes. What remained were the desperate and the dying. By mid-morning, Era found her chance. A young mule deer moved along a dry wash, ribs visible beneath its hide, steps sluggish. It wasn't the hunt Era would have chosen in another year. But there was no room for choice anymore. She dropped low, muscles coiling, breath steady, despite the ache that never quite left her chest. The chase was short, the kill clean. For a moment, just one, relief washed through her. Food. Enough to quiet the cubs' cries. Enough to buy time. The cubs tumbled forward eagerly, tearing at the meat with high, excited sounds. Luca shoved in first. Maya followed, careful but hungry. Noah approached last, slower than the others. His small body trembled with effort even as he fed. Era waited, as she always did, until the cubs had eaten. She stood guard, eyes scanning the open land, tail flicking once in irritation when a raven circled too low. Only when the cubs' hunger dulled did she lower her head to the carcass herself. She had barely taken a mouthful when Noah stiffened. At first it was subtle, a shudder that could have been mistaken for a chill, though the air shimmered with heat. Then his legs splayed awkwardly beneath him. His jaw worked without sound. Era was on him instantly. Noah convulsed, his small body locking, then jerking hard enough to kick dust into the air. A thin, desperate sound tore from his throat, sharp and wrong. Foam gathered faintly at the edge of his mouth. Maya backed away. With a frightened chirp, Luca froze mid-bite, confusion flickering across his young face. Era nosed Noah urgently, scenting his fur, his breath, the ground beneath him. Something was terribly wrong. She lifted her head and looked back at the carcass, then at her other cubs. Maya's legs trembled. Luca sat down heavily, panting. Understanding came without words. The meat. The deer had been sick. Or poisoned. Something humans left behind on the edges of their land. Something invisible. Something Era could not smell until it was too late. Noah convulsed again. Weaker this time. His body seemed to fold in on itself, as if gravity had suddenly increased. Era felt a pressure build in her chest that had nothing to do with breath. She had lost cubs before. The desert took them all eventually, one way or another. But this was different. This was her fault. She had chosen the kill. She had led them here. She had fed them. Luca staggered to his feet and pressed against her side. Maya tucked her head beneath Era's chest, trembling but still aware. They were sick. But not like Noah. Their larger bodies fought harder. They still had time. Noah did not. Era lifted her head and tasted the wind. To the north, open land and exposure. To the west, rocky outcrops and old dens. To the south, faint but unmistakable beneath the layers of dust and heat, the distant, foreign scent of humans. Metal. Fuel. Strange animals kept behind barriers. The place where pain had once stopped. The memory came unbidden. Smoke-filled air. Her own leg burning with infection. The way her body had refused to obey her. The way she had woken later behind wire. Alive when she should not have been. The human with calm hands and steady eyes who had not tried to dominate her. Only to heal. Era looked down at Noah. At the violent effort each breath now cost him. She looked at Luca and Maya. Their small sides heaving. Their eyes locked on her, as if she held the answers. The desert offered none. Era stood there longer than instinct advised. Longer than safety allowed. The sun climbed. The air thickened. Time passed whether she chose or not. Then Noah's convulsions slowed. Not because he was improving, but because he was losing strength. That was the moment. The moment when the land made its terms clear. Era lowered her head and gently took Noah by the scruff. His body was limp, frighteningly light. He made a faint sound, barely more than breath, and went still. Luca stepped forward with a small, questioning noise. Maya pressed closer, her ears flattened, sensing separation before it happened. Era did not linger. She turned away from the carcass, away from the place where the mistake had been made, and began to move. Not south yet. First, there was something she had to do. Behind her, the desert stretched on, unmoved by suffering, unchanged by love. Above, the sun burned steadily, uncaring who survived beneath it. And as Era carried Noah toward the rocks, one truth settled deep and heavy in her chest. The land would not forgive her. So she would have to find mercy somewhere else. Era did not run yet. She moved with deliberate control, carrying Noah toward the broken spine of rocks that rose from the plain like the bones of something long dead. The desert wind tugged at her mane, lifting dust that clung to the cub's damp fur. Each step jarred his small body against her chest. She adjusted her grip again and again, careful not to press too hard, careful not to lose him. Behind her, Luca and Maya followed, close enough to touch, close enough to feel the vibration of their mother's breathing. They did not understand what had gone wrong, only that the world had shifted beneath their paws. Their earlier hunger had vanished, replaced by a restless unease that kept them glancing back toward the carcass they had left behind, then forward toward their mother, as if the answer might be written on her shoulders. Era slowed as they reached the rocks. The formation was narrow and uneven, its face scarred by time and weather. She had sheltered cubs here before, during storms, had rested in its shallow shade during hunts gone wrong. It was not a den, not truly, but it was something the land still offered. She lowered Noah onto the sand and watched him closely. His chest moved now only when it had to. Each breath came with a faint hitch, a visible effort that rippled through his small frame and faded. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, as if the world around him were already slipping away. Era nudged him, then licked his face the way she always had when he tired. His ear twitched. Nothing more. Luca stepped closer and sniffed his brother, issuing a small, uncertain sound. Maya pressed against Era's front leg, her body vibrating with tension. Both cubs were still unsteady, still sick, but they were present. They were here. Era lifted her head and surveyed the open land beyond the rocks. She weighed distances the way hunters weighed risks. The human place lay far, farther than she had traveled with cubs before. The route cut across exposed ground where shade was rare and the heat unforgiving. With Noah in her jaws, her pace would be slow. She would have to stop often. And every moment she was gone would leave Luca and Maya alone. She turned her head and studied them. Really studied them now. Luca's stance was wide and clumsy. Strength without caution. Maya's eyes were sharp, tracking movement even in stillness. They were young. Too young to be left without her. But they were not as fragile as Noah. Not yet. The calculation was brutal in its simplicity. If she stayed, Noah would die. Era knew this with the quiet certainty of experience. His body was already failing him. No amount of warmth or grooming would draw him back. If she went, Noah might live. Might. The human place held strange dangers and stranger rules. But it was the only place Era had ever known where death had once turned away from her. But Luca and Maya, left alone, sick, unguarded, might not survive her absence. Predators would scent weakness quickly. Even without them, thirst and heat would exact their toll. There was no path where all three cubs lived without risk. Era stood between them, her body forming an unconscious barrier, and felt the pull in opposite directions tear at her chest. The desert did not pause for decisions. Time kept moving. Shadow shifted against the rock face. Somewhere far off, a raven croaked. Noah convulsed again. Shorter. Weaker than before. The sound he made was barely audible. Era lowered her head to his, pressing her nose to his small flank. His scent was changing. Subtle but unmistakable. She straightened slowly. In her memory, unbidden, rose the image of wire and shade. Of cold fluid in her veins. Of pain easing where it should not have. Of hands that had not struck or chased or claimed. Only steadied. Era did not understand trust the way humans did. But she understood patterns. She understood cause and consequence. And she understood that nothing in this land would save Noah. She turned to Luca and Maya and touched each of them in turn. A firm nudge. A low sound in her chest that carried meaning older than words. Asterisk, stay close. Stay quiet. Do not follow. Asterisk. Luca let out a soft protest. Maya pressed harder against her. Era did not waver. She took Noah by the scruff once more, lifting him gently, and stepped back from the rocks. Her muscles tensed, ready to move southward now, toward the faint trace of metal and fuel that marked the human place. But she did not leave yet. Not before making sure Luca and Maya had a chance. She circled the rocks once. Then again. Scent marking the ground deliberately. Not loudly. Not carelessly. She was careful to leave trails where she wanted them to be found, and none where she did not. She scanned the nearby scrub, memorizing lines of approach, listening for the sounds that meant danger. The desert held its breath. Era returned to the rocks and lowered Noah once more, just long enough to make one final decision. This was the moment where instinct screamed one thing and love demanded another. The moment where there was no right answer. Only a choice that would shape everything that followed. Era bent her head and nudged Luca and Maya toward the narrow gap between stone and brush. They hesitated, then squeezed through, pressed by her insistence, settling into the shallow hollow beyond. It was not perfect. It was not safe. It was the best she could do. She stood there a long moment, committing the sight of them to memory, their shapes, their scents, the way Maya's tail curled protectively around Luca's flank. Then she turned away. This time she did not look back. She lifted Noah and began to walk, then to trot, then to move with the long, relentless stride that would carry her beyond the rocks, beyond the carcass, beyond the place where the land had failed her, toward the only mercy she had left to try. Era did not head south immediately. Instead, she angled away from the open plain, moving sideways along the rock formation. Noah's weight, light but unforgiving, pressed against her jaw. Every instinct urged speed. Distance meant time, and time meant breath. But Era forced herself to slow. There were things that had to be done first. Leaving was not enough. Leaving unprepared would be a death sentence. She stopped where the rocks folded inward, where a narrow crease in the stone ran deep enough to swallow shadow even at midday. Era had used this place before, not as a den, but as a pause. A place the wind rarely touched. A place that smelled mostly of stone, not of prey. She lowered Noah gently and turned back the way she had come. Luca and Maya were still where she had left them, pressed together in the shallow hollow behind brush and rock. Their eyes followed her every movement. Luca shifted, restless, muscles coiled with confusion. Maya stayed low, her small body taut, absorbing the tension in the air without understanding its cause. Era stepped in close and touched them both with her nose. Slow and deliberate, she breathed them in, committing their scent to memory the way hunters memorize terrain. Dust, youth, fear, life. Then she moved. She left the cubs hidden and went hunting again. Not far, not wide, but with urgency sharpened by exhaustion. The land offered little, but desperation made her efficient. Within minutes, she flushed a desert hare from the scrub. A small, frantic burst of movement that ended quickly beneath her weight. It was barely enough, but barely enough was all she needed. Era dragged the carcass back toward the rocks, muscles screaming, breath rasping in her chest. She pushed it deep into the hollow where Luca and Maya waited, far enough that the scent would be muted, the shape obscured. The cubs surged forward instinctively, but Era blocked them with her body. Not yet. She used her forepaws to rake loose sand and grit over the ground where she had stood, erasing prints, breaking lines. She snapped brittle brush and dragged it across the entrance, weaving a chaotic barrier that would confuse a searching nose. Then, carefully, she moved away from the rocks and walked in a wide arc, deliberately heavy-footed, leaving a false trail that led east. It was a risk, a gamble layered atop another gamble, but it was the kind of thinking Era had learned after loss. After nights where she had returned to silence and understood too late what she should have done differently. She circled back quietly and returned to the hollow. Only then did she step aside and allow Luca and Maya to feed. They tore at the hare with soft, urgent sounds. Hunger momentarily overwhelming fear. Era stood over them, watchful, listening for anything that did not belong. The desert answered only with wind. When they finished, she groomed them quickly. Not the indulgent grooming of safety, but brisk, functional. Passes meant to check for weakness, to reinforce presence. Maya leaned into it. Luca protested faintly, already distracted by movement beyond the rocks. Era issued a low sound from deep in her chest. Not a warning, a command. The cubs froze. She repeated it once, softer this time, and Luca stilled. Maya pressed closer to the stone. Era backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact, reinforcing the boundary with posture and tone. Asterisk stay. Do not follow. Do not answer calls that are not mine. Asterisk. The cubs did not understand all of it, but they understood enough. Era turned and went back to Noah. He lay where she had left him, sides fluttering weakly. His scent was wrong now. Too thin, too sharp. She licked his face once, tasting sickness and dust, and lifted him again with infinite care. The sun had shifted higher. The heat pressed down harder now, flattening shadows, draining color from the land. Era adjusted her stance and set off, moving away from the rocks at a measured pace that balanced urgency with endurance. Behind her, Luca and Maya remained hidden, bellies full, bodies pressed into the stone. They could still hear her steps for a while, the familiar cadence of their mother's movement fading gradually into the background noise of the desert. Era did not allow herself to listen for them once that sound disappeared. She had marked the land. She had fed them. She had hidden them as well as the world allowed. Now there was only one direction left. South. Toward the place that smelled of metal and strange animals. Toward wire and shadows and the memory of pain easing under hands that did not belong to the wild. Toward a hope so fragile it could barely be named. Era lengthened her stride. The journey ahead would be long. She knew this. Longer still, with Noah's condition worsening by the minute. She would have to stop often. Would have to set him down and wait. Would have to choose moments to rest when every instinct screamed to keep moving. But stopping now, turning back, was no longer an option. Behind her, in a hollow of stone and brush, two small lives depended on silence, on luck, on the careful work she had done in these final moments together. Ahead of her, one small life depended on trust. Era moved forward, the weight of what she had left behind pulling at her, even as she forced herself not to look back again. Somewhere deep in her chest, something settled. Not peace, not certainty, but resolve. Whatever happened next, she had done everything she could. The desert did not rise to meet Era's resolve. It pressed back. She ran with Noah held carefully in her jaws, his small body swaying with each stride. The rhythm of her movement forced into something slower, heavier, more deliberate than instinct preferred. This was not the explosive sprint of a hunt. This was endurance. The kind that shaved strength away, grain by grain, and demanded payment for every mile. The heat thickened as the sun climbed. Shadows shrank and retreated beneath scrub and stone, leaving long stretches of open ground, exposed and unforgiving. Era felt it first in her lungs, the air growing sharp and dry, then in her legs, where exhaustion gathered like sand in a wound. She stopped after the first stretch of ground, lowering Noah onto a patch of shade cast by a boulder no taller than her shoulder. She hovered over him, watching, counting breaths without knowing numbers, only patterns. His sides lifted, fell, lifted again. Barely. Era licked his face, then stepped back, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved that shouldn't. No wings overhead. No shapes slipping between brush. Satisfied, she lifted Noah and set off again. This became the pattern. Run. Stop. Wait. Breathe. With each pause, the fear sharpened. Each time she set Noah down, Era braced. Reminded herself that stillness did not always mean death. but sometimes it did. She nudged him gently at every stop, seeking any sign that he was still with her. A twitch, a faint sound, the smallest proof. Hours passed in fragments of motion and stillness. The ground changed under her paws. Hard-packed dirt giving way to gravel, then to brittle grass that cut at her pads. Blood darkened the fur between her toes. A slow, steady ache she ignored. Pain was a constant now, background noise beneath the greater urgency. At one point, Noah's breathing faltered entirely. Era froze. She lowered her head, pressing her nose against his side, inhaling sharply. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No movement. No resistance. Then, barely, a shudder ran through him, and his chest lifted once more. Era exhaled a sound she did not know she had been holding. She rose and ran again. Longer this time, pushing past the warning burn in her muscles. The desert blurred at the edges of her vision, colors bleaching into one another beneath the sun. She crossed a dry wash where the ground dipped sharply and climbed again on the far side, her footing slipping on loose stones. She recovered without breaking stride, teeth tightening to keep Noah steady. The human place drew closer in scent, though it remained invisible. Metal and fuel rode faintly on the wind now, interwoven with the smells of strange animals kept behind barriers. Era did not understand the source of those scents, only that they marked direction. She angled toward them. Far behind her, hidden in the rocks she had left behind, Luca and Maya faced a different kind of test. The sun passed overhead and began its slow descent, stretching shadows long and thin across the land. The hair Era had left them was gone, bones and fur scattered where they had eaten in nervous haste. Hunger dulled, but fear sharpened. They heard it first. A low sound carried on the wind. Not the call of birds, not the scuffle of small animals. Something heavier, closer to the ground. Luca stiffened, ears flicking. Maya pressed deeper into the hollow, her body flattening instinctively against stone. The scent came next, strong, unmistakable, wrong. Coyote. One, then another, drawn by lingering traces of blood, of cub, of weakness. They circled the area cautiously, testing the air, following the false trail Era had laid east. It confused them, pulled them away, then back again, in and out. The cubs stayed silent, breath shallow, bodies trembling. Time stretched thin. The coyotes lingered longer than comfort allowed, pacing, sniffing, drifting closer to the rocks before veering off again. Then, from above, a sudden shadow cut across the ground. A bald eagle dropped from the sky, wings beating hard as it screamed. A sharp, piercing sound that shattered the stillness. It struck the ground with talons extended, not at the cubs, but near the coyotes, startling them with its size and fury. Dust exploded upward. The coyotes scattered, yelping, retreating into the scrub with quick, uncertain steps. The eagle lifted again, circling once, twice, then settled in a nearby dead tree, watchful. The cubs did not understand why the danger passed, only that it had. They stayed where they were, pressed into stone, hearts racing, the memory of their mother's low command holding them still long after the land fell quiet again. Miles away, Era pushed through the final stretch of open ground as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Her vision swam now, fatigue pulling at the edges of her awareness. She slowed, then stopped, lowering Noah one last time beneath the scant shade of a juniper. His breathing was uneven again, each rise shallow and uncertain. She licked his face, her tongue dragging across foam and dust, willing him to stay. The scent of the human place was strong now, close. Era lifted her head and saw it at last. A line of fencing cutting across the land. Low structures beyond it. Shapes that did not belong to the desert, but had rooted themselves there all the same. Solar panels glinted in the fading light. Canvas roofs stirred in the breeze. She gathered what remained of her strength and moved. The final approach felt endless. Every muscle protested. Her legs trembled beneath her weight. But she did not slow until she reached the fence and stopped. Standing just beyond the boundary she remembered. The land behind her lay quiet, holding its secrets. 2 cubs hidden. A gamble set in motion. Era stood there as the light softened into evening. Noah limp in her jaws. And waited for the world she was about to trust to notice her. The fence did not move. It stood exactly as Era remembered it. Wire stretched taut between steel posts, humming faintly in the evening breeze. Beyond it, the human place breathed quietly. Low buildings crouched against the land. Solar panels catching the last light. The muted clatter of tools being put away for the night. Era remained still. Her legs shook now, the tremor traveling up through her shoulders and into her jaw. Noah's weight had become almost unreal. Too light, too fragile, as if he were already halfway gone. His breath came in thin, uneven pulls against her tongue. She shifted her stance, lowering her head just enough to ease the strain on her neck. But she did not release him. Not yet. The desert behind her stretched wide and open, offering no shelter, no answers. Ahead, the human world waited. Silent, watchful, unknown. Era took one cautious step forward. The fence loomed closer. Its scent sharp and foreign. Metal, oil, old fear. Every instinct carved into her bones screamed at her to turn away. To retreat into open land where danger could be seen and answered with teeth and speed. This place was wrong. Confining. Full of unseen edges. She stopped again, chest heaving. Noah stirred weakly, his body giving a small, involuntary jerk. A thin sound escaped him, so faint it barely reached the air. That sound tipped the balance. Era closed the remaining distance and stood directly at the fence. The wire was close enough now that she could see her own reflection warped faintly in the metal. Dust-caked fur. Eyes dulled by exhaustion. A mother reduced to need. She lifted her head slightly, angling Noah's body so it would not brush the wire. She waited. Inside the compound, movement stilled. A young caretaker exiting a supply shed froze mid-step, eyes widening. A radio slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a dull clatter. He did not bend to retrieve it. "Elena," he whispered into the open air, voice shaking. "Dr. Carter." Lights flicked on one by one. Doors opened. Footsteps hurried, then slowed as people realized what stood beyond their boundary. Dr. Evelyn Carter emerged from the main building, jacket half-zipped, expression sharpening as her eyes locked onto the shape at the fence. She stopped short, breath catching in her chest. Era met her gaze. Recognition flickered across Evelyn's face. Not surprise exactly, but something heavier. Memory. Understanding. The scar on Era's shoulder caught the light. Unmistakable. Easy, Evelyn said quietly, lifting one hand to signal the others to stay back. No sudden movement. Era's ears flicked. But she did not retreat. She took a single step closer and lowered her head. The cub slid forward slightly in her jaws, his limp body swaying. His breathing stuttered again, then steadied into a shallow rhythm. Evelyn's training took over. Even as her heart pounded, she approached the fence slowly, keeping her body angled, movements deliberate. The distance between them shrank to nothing but wire and air. Up close, the cub looked worse. Foam clung to the edge of his mouth. His gums were pale. His body too still, too hot beneath the thin layer of fur. Evelyn extended her hand through the fence. Palm open. Fingers relaxed. Era did not bare her teeth. She did not growl. She stared at the human's hand as if it were a physical question, one that demanded an answer she could never take back. This was the moment when instinct and memory collided head-on, when every lesson the wild had taught her screamed that this was wrong, that nothing good came from wire and confinement and creatures who walked upright. But Era remembered pain easing. She remembered waking instead of dying. And she remembered that Noah was slipping away. Slowly, with a care that bordered on reverence, Era opened her jaws. Noah slid free. Evelyn caught him, the weight of his small body settling into her arms. He was warmer than he should have been, his breathing uneven against her sleeve. She adjusted her grip instinctively, supporting his head, keeping his airway clear. For a heartbeat, Era did not move. Her eyes locked onto the cub, now held by human arms. And something passed between them. Something raw and unguarded. Fear. Hope. An unspoken demand. Evelyn met her gaze steadily. "I've got him," she said. Voice low. Firm. "I promise." Era watched for 5 seconds. Then she turned away. Not in panic. Not in confusion. She pivoted with purpose and broke into a run. Muscles screaming as she forced her body back into motion. She did not look back. Did not allow herself the hesitation that might undo everything she had just done. Behind her, the gate clanged shut as humans moved with sudden urgency. Evelyn spun and carried Noah toward the medical tent at a near run. "We need oxygen. 4 fluids. Activated charcoal. Now," she called, voice slicing cleanly through the air. Hands moved. Doors flew open. Lights blazed to life. As Noah was laid on the table beneath the bright LED lamp, Evelyn's fingers worked quickly, checking gums, pupils, breathing. The cub convulsed weakly once more, then stilled. "Stay with me," Evelyn murmured, inserting the forecatheter with practiced precision. "Stay." Outside the fence, Era ran. She ran harder than she had at any point on the journey south. not the measured endurance pace, but something raw and reckless. The desert swallowed her quickly, shadows stretching long as night began its slow descent. Each step carried her farther from the human place and closer to the rocks where Luca and Maya waited. She did not know if Noah would live. She did not know if her gamble had already failed. She knew only that she had given everything she had left, and now there was nothing to do but return. Behind her, in the bright controlled chaos of the medical tent, a small cub clung to life beneath human hands. Ahead of her, two cubs waited in the dark, unaware that the shape of their future had just been split cleanly in two. And between those 2 points, between hope and fear, Era ran, driven by a choice she could never undo. Era did not slow until the human lights vanished behind her, swallowed by distance and darkness. The desert accepted her back without ceremony, the night cooling fast as the sun bled out along the horizon. Her legs burned, her lungs scraped, and still she ran, because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering the weight that was no longer in her jaws. She reached the rocks long after the moon rose. The land was quieter now, sounds muted by night, every rustle amplified. Era circled once, twice, reading the ground the way she always had, by absence as much as presence. No fresh tracks where they shouldn't be, no sharp tang of predator lingering near the hollow. She slipped between stone and brush, and stopped. Luca and Maya erupted from the shadow at once, small bodies colliding with her chest, their voices tumbling over each other in urgent, questioning sounds. Era pressed her head over them, inhaling deeply, counting what mattered. 2 heartbeats, 2 warm bodies, alive. But the third was missing. Maya searched first, nosing beneath Era's chest, then pulling back, confused. Luca circled her, sniffing her flanks, then froze, head lifting, ears swiveling as if listening for a sound that did not come. Era issued a low, steady call, one she used to gather them, not to answer questions. She herded them deeper into the hollow and curled around them, closing her body into a barrier of fur and muscle. The night moved on around them, and the desert did what it always did. It waited. The first days passed in fragments. Era hunted cautiously, never ranging far, never leaving Luca and Maya hidden for long. The cubs were still recovering, still weak in ways that showed when they tried to play and tired too quickly, when their steps faltered on uneven ground. Era adjusted, slowed, adapted. She taught them to listen, to stay downwind, to freeze when the land spoke danger. At night, when they slept, Luca and Maya pressed close, seeking warmth and something else. They made small sounds sometimes, soft and searching. The call meant for a sibling who should have answered. Era did not respond to those calls. She could not. On the third night, Maya awoke suddenly and cried out. A sharp, high sound that sliced the dark. Era was on her feet instantly, heart hammering, scanning the scrub. There was nothing there. No movement. No threat. Only fear. Era pressed her nose to Maya's head and breathed until the cub's trembling slowed. The land offered no explanations. It never did. At the same time, far beyond the rocks and brush, time moved differently. Under the white lights of the medical tent, Noah lay wrapped in warmth and wire. The first hours were a blur of motion. Hands moving with practiced urgency. Fluids flowing. Charcoal binding what it could. Medication steadying what refused to obey. His seizures lessened. Then stopped. His breathing smoothed into a fragile rhythm that demanded constant watching. Dr. Evelyn Carter slept in fragments on a chair beside the enclosure, waking at every change in sound, every alarm's soft chirp. She watched numbers settle and spike and settle again, hope arriving in cautious increments. On the second day, Noah opened his eyes. They were unfocused at first, pupils wide and uncertain, but they tracked movement. He responded to touch with a weak push of his paws, a faint protest when handled too much. He drank when coaxed, slowly at first, then with growing insistence. "He's fighting," Evelyn said quietly to the staff gathered around. "That's something." But something was not enough. By the end of the first week, the immediate danger had passed, replaced by a quieter concern. Noah followed Evelyn with his eyes. He pressed against her hand when she adjusted his blankets. He stilled when she spoke. Imprinting. Evelyn adjusted protocols immediately. Less handling. Feeding through barriers when possible. Enrichment that encouraged distance. Independence. She moved carefully, walking a line she had walked before and hated every time, because the truth pressed in on her. Heavy and unavoidable. A lion cub raised without his family would never truly return to the wild. By the second week, Noah's strength returned in visible ways. His coat regained its sheen. His movements sharpened. He pounced on toys meant to mimic prey. Stalked shadows with focused intensity. He was alive in a way that made loss feel unbearable. Evelyn watched him and thought of the way the lioness had stood at the fence. Without fear. Without aggression. Offering the one thing she could not replace. "She'll come back," Evelyn told herself more than once. She had no evidence. No tracking collar. No camera trap image. Only conviction built from a look she had seen before. Out in the desert, the days wore on. Era counted them without knowing numbers. By the moon's phases. By the lengthening mornings. By the cub's growing steadiness. Luca put on muscle quickly, his movements gaining confidence. Maya learned faster, adjusting her steps to terrain, anticipating changes in the wind. They learned to hunt small things together under Era's watchful eye. Lizards, insects, nothing that mattered. But everything did. At night, the absence remained. On the 17th day, Era caught a familiar scent carried on a shifting breeze. Metal. Faint. But unmistakable. She stopped and lifted her head, tasting the air. The cubs watched her closely. Era stood like that for a long time, torn between caution and the ache that had never left her chest. The land around them was stable now. Luca and Maya were stronger. The risks had changed. On the 21st morning, Era made her decision. She rose before the sun and issued a call the cubs had not heard before. Not urgent. Not warning. But directional. Asterisk follow. Stay close. Asterisk. Luca and Maya responded immediately. falling into place behind her as she turned south. The journey was slower this time. Era allowed for rest, for water when it could be found, for the cubs' uneven endurance. They traveled through night and dawn, through the long, quiet hours when the desert seemed to hold its breath. By the time the scent of metal grew strong again, Era felt the old tension return, tightening her shoulders, sharpening her awareness. She slowed and moved carefully, scanning the land ahead. At the edge of the human place, the fence cut its familiar line across the ground. Era stopped. Behind her, Luca and Maya pressed close, bodies tense, eyes wide as they took in the shapes and sounds that did not belong to their world. Era stood between them and the wire, her posture firm, controlled. Inside the compound, Dr. Evelyn Carter looked up from her clipboard and froze. Because standing beyond the fence, framed by morning light and dust, was a lioness she had not dared to hope for. And she was not alone. Evelyn did not move at first. She stood just inside the fence, clipboard forgotten in her hands, breath caught halfway between surprise and relief. The lioness beyond the wire was thinner than before, her coat roughened by weeks of hard travel and harder nights. Dust clung to her flanks. Old scars showed clearly now, lines etched by survival rather than age. But she was standing, and pressed close behind her were two young lions, larger than cubs, smaller than adolescents, their movements cautious but alert. One male, all raw strength and curiosity, barely restrained. One female, leaner, sharper-eyed, already reading the space the way her mother did. Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen that she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 3 weeks. She came back. Someone whispered behind her. "Yes," Evelyn said quietly. She did. Era remained still, her body angled protectively in front of Luca and Maya. Her head was high, eyes fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that carried no threat, only expectation. The cubs shifted, unsettled by the fence, the scents, the unfamiliar shapes of people standing too close. Maya flinched when a bird startled nearby. Luca lifted his head, nostrils flaring, catching a scent that made him freeze. A scent he knew. Inside the enclosure, Noah lifted his head. He had been stalking a rubber ball when the wind shifted. His movement stilled, instincts cutting through play. His ears pricked forward. His nose twitched once, then again. Recognition came not as memory, but as something deeper, older than thought. Noah let out a high, sharp chirp. The sound cut cleanly through the air. Era's head snapped up. The cubs stiffened. Evelyn's breath left her in a rush. She turned to the nearest caretaker. "Open the east holding gate," she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Slowly. And bring him out." The gate creaked as it opened, metal complaining softly. Noah stepped forward uncertainly, paws hitting open ground. He paused, confused by the sudden space, by the lack of barriers. Then Era answered him. The sound she made was low and complex, a pattern of calls layered with meaning. It was the sound of reassurance, of belonging, of home. Noah bolted. He ran without hesitation, legs pumping, small body moving with a speed that surprised even him. He crossed the space between fence and holding area and crashed into Era's chest, burying his face against her fur. The impact knocked her back a half step. She steadied instantly and lowered her head, grooming him with frantic precision, licking his face, his neck, his sides, checking him over again and again as if he might vanish if she stopped. Luca and Maya rushed forward next, confusion giving way to recognition as Noah's scent hit them fully. They collided in a tangle of limbs and sound, chirping, shoving, climbing over one another in a chaotic burst of joy. The reunion was not gentle. It was desperate, loud, alive. Era stood over them, her body finally relaxing as the shape of her family reformed beneath her eyes. She nudged them together, issuing small corrections when they strayed too far, drawing them back into a tight cluster. Evelyn felt tears blur her vision and made no attempt to hide them. Around her, no one spoke. No one moved closer. The humans had learned their place in this moment. After several long minutes, the frenzy softened. Noah pressed against his mother's side, breathing fast but steady. Luca nipped at his ear affectionately. Maya settled close, her body angled protectively despite being nearly his size now. Era lifted her head and looked at Evelyn. There was no fear in her gaze, no accusation, only a quiet assessment and something like acknowledgement. Evelyn took a slow step back, giving space, lowering her eyes slightly in a gesture that felt instinctive, respectful. "He's strong," she said softly, though she knew Era did not need the reassurance. "He's ready." Era watched her for a moment longer, then turned away. She gathered her cubs with practiced nudges and soft sounds, guiding them toward the open land beyond the fence. Noah hesitated once, glancing back at Evelyn, confusion flickering across his face. Then Era called again. Noah turned and followed. The four of them moved together across the ground, their shapes growing smaller as they passed into the scrub. Era led, steady and sure. Luca ranged slightly wider now, testing his confidence. Maya stayed close, eyes always moving. At the edge of the land, where brush thickened and shadows deepened, Era paused. She looked back once. Evelyn stood where she was, hand resting against the fence, heart full in a way that hurt. The lioness dipped her head, a small, unmistakable gesture, and then she was gone. The desert closed around the family, swallowing their forms into dust and light, until there was nothing left but silence and the wide, open land. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Around her, the world resumed its ordinary sounds. Radios crackling, boots shifting, wind moving through wire. But something fundamental had changed. Later, as the sun sank low and painted the rocks in gold and amber, Evelyn stood alone at the fence and looked out across the land. A mother had trusted humans with her dying child. That trust had not been misplaced. Somewhere out there, 3 young lions were learning the shape of their world again under their mother's watchful eye. And Era, scarred, exhausted, unbroken, was doing what she had fought so hard to do. She was raising her family. The desert did not soften. It never would. But sometimes, just sometimes, when a choice was made out of love rather than fear, the land allowed mercy to pass through it. And that was enough. Before you leave, take a quiet moment and ask yourself this. If you were that mother standing at the edge of the unknown, would you have made the same choice? Asterisk if this story touched your heart, simply comment 1 below. If it made you stop and think, comment 0. Asterisk. Sometimes a single number says more than 1,000 words. Asterisk and if you believe stories like this matter, stories about love, trust, and the choices that define us, please subscribe. Stay with us because there are many more true stories waiting to be told. And each one reminds us that compassion still exists in this world. Asterisk.